issue up, but it was proposed by one of the new tribunes of the plebs. Cicero had to figure out how to deal with it. The actual bill was kind of similar to the land reform bills that Caesar would later pass, only smaller in scope. A commission, 10 members this time, were to buy up land and redistribute it via lottery to urban poor. In order to pay for this, the commission was authorized to sell publicly owned land in Italy and Rome. At the time, Cicero thought that Caesar was secretly behind this bill, but he had no proof. Based on the similarities between this bill and the one that Caesar would later pass, we can look back with some hindsight and say that he was probably right. Cicero did everything he could to turn public opinion against this bill. He went around stirring up old fears, calling the 10 commissioners the 10 kings. He did his job, because the Senate voted down the bill, and there was very little to look back on. The downside of all of this is that the reformers now saw Cicero as an arch-conservative, which honestly he really wasn't. He was an institutionalist, and his problem with land reform was just that it was destabilizing. Cicero may have been consul, but he was still a lawyer at heart. He spent a lot of time in the courts during his year, serving as a defense attorney in 2 major cases. The first was some really stupid case where some of the reformers accused a conservative senator of murder 37 years ago. It was a big, stupid, politically motivated thing. The guy was innocent and everybody was. Cicero saw it as his duty as consul to defend the senator. The case ended just as stupidly as it began, when Cicero and his allies deliberately caused a mistrial by using some The guy got off, but I mean, if you ask me, nobody really walked away from it looking particularly great. Cicero's second legal case will come later, but first he had to oversee the election during next year's consul. Cicero learned from his intelligence network, or more accurately, I would say, his wife's intelligence network, that Catilina, the guy who came in third last year and was a candidate again this year, was plotting a series of assassinations on election day. When election day came, Cicero openly wore body armor, something he weren't really supposed to do, and showed up with a gang of bodyguards. For whatever reason, maybe the assassins were intimidated by the show of force. Violence was averted. Cicero oversaw the election of his 2 successors, and in a cruel twist of fate, Catilina came in third again. Apparently, he pretty much bankrupted himself paying out bribes. He didn't have the means to run the election third time. Cicero's second legal case came up after the elections and was a lot more consequential. One of the losers of the consular election was accusing one of the winners of bribery and wanted the results thrown out. This had the potential of being really destabilizing. Bribing people during elections was very illegal and very common. Everybody did it. Cicero had even campaigned against bribery, while his conservative backers continued to bribe everybody behind the scenes. It wasn't escapable. Cicero's logic was, if we start throwing out election results because of bribery, every future election would be followed by a court case. He chose to lead the defense. Cato, the arch-conservative, represented the prosecution. It got ugly. Cato went on and on about how corruption and bribery had seeped into Roman public life, which all happened to be true. Cicero responded by not addressing the facts of the case, because, again, the defendant was definitely guilty, and just mocked Cato to his face. He called his philosophy silly. He called him unrealistic. He even made an obnoxious appeal to nationalism, saying something along the lines of, "This isn't Greece. Here in Rome, things get messy, but things get done." Cicero won the case, but after this, in a kind of symbolic gesture to prove that he wasn't pro-bribery, Cicero introduced and passed a law that increased the punishment for blatant bribery to up to 10 years of exile. Again, this was symbolic and more of a lesson to future candidates, saying, "Okay guys, pull back on the bribery a bit, let's get into it." In October, after all of the turmoil with the election was finally put to rest, Crassus, a senator from the Reform faction, came to see Cicero. He showed Cicero a letter he had written, telling him of a secret plan to overthrow the government, masterminded by Catilina. Around the same time, Cicero started to hear reports of a small army mustering north of Rome. These two things had to be linked. Cicero presented his evidence to the Senate and placed Catilina under house arrest. As a precaution, the Senate passed a law called the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, aka the Final Decree or the Final Act, which empowered the consuls to do whatever was necessary to defend the Republic. Think of it as a form of martial law. Cicero's wife's spies learned that one night, Catilina slipped his guards and attended a meeting where, again, a plot was hatched to assassinate Cicero. After Learning of this, Cicero put his home on lockdown, and his gang of bodyguards wouldn't let anybody through without the right password. This seems pretty basic to us, but Roman homes were normally open to the public, and the act of giving a password like this was a well-known military tradition. Cicero basically transformed his home into a military encampment. The symbolism wasn't lost on anybody. At the next meeting of the Senate, Cicero put forward a bill to banish Catilina. He was empowered to do whatever he deemed necessary under the final act, but he wanted to stay on the same side as the Senate. Unfortunately, nobody wanted to put themselves on the record against Catilina. Cicero, realizing that he had misread the room, quickly switched tactics and was like, okay, how about we banish this random other senator instead? The Senate was like, but he did nothing wrong. And Cicero was like, aha, so you admit Catilina did something wrong. Not Cicero's finest moment. In the end, he was right though, because Catilina fled the city that night and joined up with the army in the north, and declared himself the head of the new government in waiting. The situation was now on the precipice of civil war. Sometime later, one of Catilina's allies in the city went to a diplomat from a Gallic tribe visiting Rome and was like, hey, we're going to overthrow the government, let's team up. The diplomat went directly to Cicero and reported to him what had happened. Cicero was like, no, go along with it. Now he had his spy on the inside of the conspiracy. The Gallic diplomat set up a big meeting with a bunch of conspirators to coordinate their plans. And when everybody showed up, Cicero was there with his bodyguards, and all of the traitors were arrested. Cicero went before the Senate and said that he wanted these guys put to death. His argument was that the city was a powder keg, and they had no way of knowing how deep the conspiracy went. If they executed these leaders, it might be enough to put an end to the whole rebellion and avert a war. Remember, the Senate had already empowered Cicero to do whatever was necessary to keep the Republic safe, so he was not required to get the Senate's permission for any of this. But Cicero believed in the Senate, and he didn't want to go against their wishes. Both of the incoming consuls agreed with Cicero to put the prisoners to death. All of the ex-consuls agreed as well. So did all of the praetors. When it came time for the incoming praetor, Caesar wins. Caesar argued that executing these men without a trial was an authoritarian thing to do, and it set a dangerous precedent for the future. He suggested that